Yeah, and the floor is yours. Welcome.
Super, thank you. Labas Dienas, and thank you very much for having me into this distinguished panel and distinguished discussion, a very important discussion indeed. I would have loved to be with you in Lithuania, in Vilnius, but unfortunately my travel schedule did not allow it. I have a warm heart for the Baltic states, as my wife is Latvian, so I hope to be able to visit Lithuania also soon again. Indeed, my name is Dirk Jacobs, and I'm Director General of Food Drink Europe, the voice of the European food and drink industry. And what was said before is absolutely right. The food and drink industry is not a homogeneous bunch. We have over 294,000 companies in our midst, 294,000 companies that are all very diverse in the way their production is organized, in the way business models are implemented, the strategies they are applying. And this is also the beauty of our sector. We are a sector that covers so many food and drink categories and models that makes it very rich. And that's what Europe should indeed be proud of. So 294,000 companies, 99% of which are small and medium-sized enterprises. And out of those 99%, are 90% approximately micro enterprises, which means that these are companies that have fewer than 10 people employed in their organization. So this is an important given because we are a very local sector, a sector that is often very closely interlinked with the farmers. 70% of what European farmers produce goes into processing, manufacturing. And that's why also geographically we are much more related in the rural, located in the rural areas of Europe. Another interesting fact about our sector is that the European food and drink sector is one of the largest manufacturing sectors of Europe in terms of turnover, with a turnover of over 1 trillion euros per year. But we're also the largest employer in the manufacturing sectors of Europe, with over 4.6 million people being employed in food and drink manufacturing. And if you extend that even to the wider food chain, it's in the 40 to 50 millions. So this is quite considerable. And we're also the largest sector in terms of providing added value. 0.9% of the gross GDP of Europe is coming from food and drink manufacturing. Another interesting statistic is that we are the largest exporter of food and drink in the world as an EU. So that makes us also an important player on the global stage. And indeed, there is a lot of interlinkage of companies, of supply chains, of streams that are that make our interesting industry also rather complex. And we've seen that when we were confronted with the discussions on Brexit, where borders and controls were put in place and sort of leading to additional costs for industry, where you have, for instance, the example of a Bailey's, the liquor cream that travels between Northern Ireland and Ireland 6 times before it is turned into the final product. So if 6 times you're confronted with additional charges and costs because of customs inspections and so forth, you can imagine the challenge. But we've also seen those challenges when we were confronted with the COVID pandemic, when we've been confronted with the ongoing war in Ukraine, when we are dealing with energy crisis. It's always that food and food production is center stage. And there are 3 different impacts that I think you can identify. One is the impact on supply and on inputs. We've seen how vulnerable we've been when agricultural raw materials and prices have jumped considerably, how vulnerable we still are if harvests do not go right, and how that impacts the production along the chain. So think, for instance, about French mustard. Last year, the harvest of mustard seeds in the east of Europe, but also in Canada, has not gone according to plan. And this year, we're faced with shortages of mustard seeds that are used for the production of mustard, French mustard in particular. So this shows the vulnerability on the input side, but it's also about energy. In Europe, we face a competitive disadvantage, also partly due to the Russian invasion in Ukraine, in terms of energy and like energy availability, but also the price of energy, the cost of energy has skyrocketed and is still not back to the levels that we were confronted with before the pandemic. Things like packaging is another one where prices of containers and so forth have gone up considerably, where also the availability has been a huge issue. So this has been a huge section of impact, no matter the kind of crisis that you've been talking about, whether you're talking about geopolitical crisis or health pandemic crisis and so forth. This input side is a vulnerability. A second element is around markets. When the COVID pandemic happened, we lost markets in the HoReCa sector, as I said, the hospitality sector, the bars, restaurants that worked for a while, exports into other, like sort of premium exports into other countries that had closed the borders and so forth. So that also has put a lot of challenges. And we've seen the same when, of course, when the war in Ukraine started, in terms of availability of the raw materials again, sunflower oil coming from Ukraine, for instance, that where companies had to switch. And the third element, and I should say maybe also there that countries' first reaction in many instances has been to impose export bans or export restrictions, which has actually made things worse. So an open market is crucial in order to preserve supply chain production and so forth. And the third element, sometimes a bit overlooked, is labor, people. So we were confronted during the pandemic with the fact that workers in the factories could not move from one country to another. They couldn't go to their factories. And in fact, we're seeing now the same even in Israel and Gaza, where some people that are living on the West Bank are not able to enter to their work because they are stuck. So these are the kind of vulnerabilities that are affecting our food production, and we have to think about what can we do to build preparedness and resilience of food production moving forward. Now, coming to that, there are, in our view, two different strands of action that are needed. There is short-term measures that are needed. We've for instance, as a food industry, need flexibility to switch very quickly our sourcing in case of disruption of our supply chains. So when we were confronted with a lack of available sunflower oil coming from Ukraine, can we switch to alternative oils? Can we do so in a way that where there's flexibility in the labeling? So that we don't need to change the packaging and create waste and all of that. So there are some short-term measures that are needed, both in terms of the policy, but also in terms of the financial support, particularly for the small companies I was talking about. So all these recovery reliefs, all these temporary state aid funds that have been imposed also by the EU, that is something that needs to be structurally ingrained in policy. But even more importantly, knowing that we are going to be confronted with crisis in the next years or in the next decades, we now need to also focus on the medium to long-term building of resilience and sustainability of our food systems. And we believe that is, on the one hand, a matter of diversification. So we cannot all produce exactly the same, and we should not. We should diversify crops. We should diversify our business models. We should diversify trade, because also trade has an important role to play, but we cannot just only do trade with a few countries and that's it. So there's a diversification strategy that is absolutely needed. But there's also the need for investment. And it's with also the EU elections in mind that we, as Food Drink Europe, have been calling for a food investment and resilience plan, something that helps to accelerate the green transition and make it such a transition that it is not only a sustainable transition, but also a competitive and a resilience transition. So allowing companies with investment capacity to invest in greening the supply chains and making supply chains stronger. So this food investment and resilience plans has 5 different elements, where one aspect is investment, and we estimate that we need approximately 50 billion euro per year only to transition to sustainable agriculture. So that cannot only be covered by the common agricultural policy. We need to find all other streams for that. Secondly, we need innovation. We need to do much better as Europe, the European Union, to speed up innovation. And if you compare ourselves to the US or to China or India, they are much faster in allowing access to innovation also in the food space. So we need to step that up. Thirdly, we need better security of supply and trade. So we need to have a proactive trade agenda, sign free trade agreements with countries that are reliable, that share our values, that we can work with to avoid that we are confronted with shortages in the future. Fourthly, we need to have better regulation. We are seeing a fragmentation of the single market of the European Union, which is in fact going against building resilience and being prepared for crisis. And in fact, all the crises were resolved, all the crisis measures that the EU took, like the green lanes, the solidarity lanes, and all of that, are coming back to the single market. So the single market is absolutely crucial. And then lastly, we need better governance. We still see a lot of, also in the regulatory side, a lot of incoherence and inconsistency between different policies that are making it very difficult to really be prepared for the future. So we hope that this idea of a food investment and resilience plan, which you can also find on our website, will be carried forward. We have the EU elections coming up in June 2024. So I would also like to thank the Lithuanian Food Industry Association for having this debate. But also there's now a momentum to build a much more systemic approach to crisis preparedness and resilience for the food and drink industry. So let's take that moment, and I hope that we can have a good conversation on this basis. Thank you.